In 2004, a 50-foot tsunami took 230,000 lives. It seems like the absolute limit of water's power. But imagine the Empire State Building. The wave we are going to talk about would have easily cleared its spire. In 1958, in Alaska, 90 million tons of rock plummeted into a bay. The water rose to an inconceivable 1,720 feet. Do you think you are safe, far from the ocean? Lituya Bay proves it. The quietest harbors can turn into perfect hydrodynamic traps in a single second. How exactly did the geography of this fjord-like bay force water to defy gravity and rise a third of a mile into the sky? Why did logical attempts to escape in cold blood kill people on the spot, while the only chance of survival was to steer your boat straight into the jaws of this monster? And most importantly, where on the planet right now is the exact same megatsunami maturing, waiting for its trigger? Let's break down the mechanics of the perfect natural murder weapon and the chronicle of the last 24 hours in Lituya Bay before the disaster. The story of this disaster began 5 years before the actual strike. In 1953, geologists George Plafker and Don Miller arrived at Lituya Bay, Alaska, searching for oil. They didn't find any oil, but they discovered something that completely contradicted the laws of nature.
Studying the shoreline, the scientists noticed a strange anomaly. Mature, centuries-old coniferous forests did not extend all the way down to the water, as is usually the case in the region. Instead, the mountain slopes were banded by a distinct line. Below this line grew only young trees, while above it stood an ancient forest. Scientists called this boundary the trim line. After cutting down several young trees and studying their rings in a laboratory, they reached a terrifying conclusion. The entire bay was regularly subjected to the impact of giant waves. Documented traces led to the events of 1936, 1916, and 1853. To understand why the water here behaves so aggressively, you have to look at the blueprints of the bay itself. Lituya is a T-shaped fjord cutting 7 miles inland. On 3 sides, it is squeezed by steep cliffs, and at its entrance to the ocean, it is blocked by a narrow underwater spit called La Chaussée, which is only 1,800 feet wide. Right beneath the bay runs the powerful Fairweather seismic fault. The bay acted like a narrow glass into which a heavy rock was dropped at massive speed. The steep shores prevented energy from dissipating, and the narrow exit blocked the rapid release of water. The only mystery left was the mechanics of the detonator itself, unleashing this crushing force. The answer would come 5 years later, and the witnesses would be people trapped right inside the barrel. The evening of July 9, 1958, was peaceful. 3 fishing boats dropped anchor in the enclosed waters of Lituya Bay, taking shelter from the currents of the open ocean. Bill and Vivian Swanson were on the Badger. Orville and Mickey Wagner were on the Sunmore. And Howard Ulrich and his 7-year-old son were on the Audrey. At 10:15 at night, the silence was shattered by a rumble. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck along the Fairweather fault. Howard Ulrich woke up as his boat began to rock violently. Bill Swanson, thrown from his bunk, looked toward the northern end of the bay and saw a surreal sight. The Lituya Glacier literally jumped several hundred feet into the air, shaking and shedding massive chunks of ice. But the water didn't rebel because of the shaking itself. Usually, tsunamis form far out in the ocean when tectonic plates on the sea floor shift and displace a column of water. Here, a different, much more brutal physics took over. The earthquake broke off a colossal monolith from the mountain. Approximately 40 million cubic yards of rock plummeted from a height of 3,000 feet directly into the inner Gilbert Inlet. To grasp this volume, imagine a mass equal to 16 Great Pyramids of Giza falling from more than half a mile high. 90 million tons of rock slammed into the water with the sound of an explosion that could be heard 50 miles away. The water in the narrow fjord had nowhere to go. The massive volume of rock simply displaced it. The water surged up the opposite mountain slope to a height of hundreds of feet, then crashed back down, forming a wall that raced down the narrow corridor of the bay toward the ocean exit at a speed of 100 to 130 miles per hour. The people on the 3 small boats heard a deafening roar. A darkness was moving straight toward them, grinding up everything in its path. They had only seconds to make decisions, and those decisions would determine who among them would see the dawn. When the wall of water, carrying shattered centuries-old trees and chunks of ice, burst around the bend, logic dictated only one action: run. Orville and Mickey Wagner on the Sunmore did exactly that. They immediately pulled up their anchor and hit full throttle toward the bay's exit, trying to outrun the wave. But competing with a hydrodynamic force flying at the speed of a race car in a narrow space is impossible. The wave easily overtook their boat. Eyewitnesses saw the vessel disappear beneath the churning water, leaving only an oil spot on the surface. The Wagners were never seen again. Howard Ulrich on the Edrie found himself in a different trap. A snagged anchor left the vessel right in the path of the oncoming wave. Realizing escape was impossible, he put a life jacket on his 7-year-old son, transmitted a final radio message, and turned the nose of the boat straight into the oncoming wall of water. The boat was tossed vertically upward. 240 feet of anchor chain pulled taut and snapped like a string. They were carried high over the tops of spruce trees in a solid mass of uprooted trunks. They flew on this crest for nearly 2 miles. A monstrous force that should have instantly turned the vessel into splinters failed to do so. Against all odds, it stayed whole. The father and son miraculously survived in the very epicenter of the catastrophe. The Badger faced a different fate. They weren't carried 2 miles through the bay on the wave. Instead, the wall of water acted like a ramp, launching the vessel through the air over the spit and directly into the open ocean. Soaring to an incredible height, Bill could see the tops of 80-foot trees beneath the keel. The landing destroyed the vessel, the hull shattered into pieces. Left alive, the Swansons scrambled into a life raft. Their agonizing drift among the wreckage lasted 2 hours. The rescue ship Lumen pulled them from the water, though it was actually responding to the distress signal from Ulrich's boat. Of the 6 people in Lituya Bay that night, 2 died trying to run away. 4 survived by meeting the impact head-on. They stayed alive because of the boat's design, a lucky angle of entry into the flow, and pure luck. But when the water calmed and the dust settled, people saw the true scale of what nature had done to the landscape. A few weeks after the disaster, geologist Don Miller returned to Lituya Bay armed with an altimeter. What he saw went beyond the bounds of any human experience. The mountain slopes around the inner inlet looked as if they had been scraped clean by a razor blade. The wave hadn't just washed away the forest, it had scoured the soil down to the bare bedrock. Miller began climbing the slope, measuring the height of the fresh scar. His instrument registered a maximum mark of 1,720 feet above sea level. This was exactly how high the water surged during the initial impact of the landslide against the opposite shore of the bay. To get the scientific community to believe these numbers, it took years of laboratory testing. A team from the University of California, Berkeley, created an exact model of Lituya Bay at a 1 to 1,000 scale. By releasing a block of material into the water at high speed and the correct angle, engineers repeatedly got the same result. The splash perfectly matched the trim line documented by Miller. The bay operated as a flawless hydrodynamic catapult. The wave in Lituya Bay went down in history as the highest ever recorded. It claimed the lives of 5 people, 2 on the Sunmore and 3 more on nearby Contact Island, which sank underwater during the earthquake. This narrow bay became a living textbook on the physics of extreme events. And the lesson is crystal clear. Nature doesn't need open oceans to create monsters. All it takes is a steep slope, deep water, and the force of gravity. Today, due to climate change, glaciers are retreating worldwide, exposing unstable rock formations above dozens of other narrow bays and fjords. The geographic traps are set. The only question is where and when the next rock will fall.